Alrighty, I went ahead and broke out the upcoming section into more videos. Hopefully they will be smaller. And let's just talk really quickly about what's coming up. So in this video, we're doing the prefab factory. We'll talk more about what that is here shortly, but basically that's responsible for instantiating objects at runtime, such as confirmed dialog boxes or actors or whatever. Then we're moving on to the client UI, so that's just putting together the debug login window. We're going to do command line processing and implement token login. Hopefully a pretty short video. Another short video coming up is we're going to be integrating Photon's fibers with our deferred API, so that'll be nice. Then we will be setting up the server, so we'll flesh out our IOC. We'll get our database connection and being able to inject the database connection to our different services, and then we'll do our main lobby service. Then we'll finish out the login system. So at this point, once we get to this video, we'll actually be able to log into the game. Then we're going to go ahead and build our the rest of the lobby stuff. I might break these videos actually might be broken out a little bit more as well. All right, let's go ahead and get started with the prefab factory. So, like I said, the prefab factory is basically responsible for instantiating objects at runtime. So those objects might be actors, such as a player's avatar, another player's avatar, whatever. It also might be UI elements that's going to be attached to a global canvas that will overlay everything else in the scene. So we're going to add a canvas with a don't destroy on load so that we'll be able to attach UI elements onto the screen and most importantly be able to design those UI elements within the Unity editor and not have to rely on defining them within code. So the way that this is going to work is we are going to have a resources folder in here. So I'm going to create a new folder called resources. Now remember the resources, oops, we already have a resources folder. Derp. What's in here? Oh, our config. Now remember the resources are things that are going to be available at runtime even if they're not added to a scene. As you know, Unity will filter out and not add any object to the final package if it's not referenced from a scene somewhere. But if it's in the resources folder, it'll always be included. So that's a great place to put our prefab. So I'm going to right-click resources and create a new folder. I'm going to call this prefab. So the way that this is going to work is we're going to create these prefab classes. And then we're going to attach these prefab classes to game objects, and then we're going to turn those into prefabs, and we're going to put them in the prefabs folder. Then at runtime, a component is going to scan the prefabs folder, find every single object that is a prefab behavior, or is a prefab with a prefab behavior on it, and add it to a list at runtime. So then when we want to instantiate, say, a alert dialog box or a confirm dialog box or an enemy NPC or whatever, we would just say instantiate followed by the class name and everything will be hooked up by magic. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Jumping over here into code, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to be adding this to the infrastructure namespace because it's really a generic component that's that isn't really any specific game logic here. And we're going to be putting together two classes. The first class is going to be a prefab behavior. So it's going to be prefab behavior, and prefab behavior is going to inherit from mono behavior. So the idea is that, and we can go ahead and make this abstract too, just to make sure we don't accidentally add the prefab behavior directly to a prefab, which might really confuse things. Anyway, the purpose of the prefab behavior is like I said, we're going to have classes that inherit from this, and this is kind of the marker to determine what the entry point component for a prefab is. And I wanted to have a game context. So we're going to do a protected game context, and we're going to have a public void set context, game context. And it's simply going to do that. But it's also, it's also going to go ahead and invoke an onReady method, similar to how our Unity system base, when we have the set context, we have the onConnected method. So we're going to simply say onReady. And onReady is going to be a protected virtual void onReady method with an empty body. So that way we can, by overriding the onReady method, this kind of replaces what we would use awake for. And the reason for that is once this method is invoked, we know we have a valid context, because unfortunately we can't really hook into the life cycle of a component within Unity. Okay, so next up, let's go ahead and create our prefab factory. So prefab factory. Now this won't be a mono behavior. The prefab factory is actually going to be created by our by our game context, which is a mono behavior. So for now, we're just going to be implementing two methods, and I'll just stub them out real fast so you can get an idea of the API surface that we have here. We're going to have a constructor that takes into context, and we're also going to have a public t instantiate t, where t is a prefab behavior, and we're also going to have a non-generic version of this, which will be public t base instantiate t base, where t base, whoops, we need a parameter list here that'll take in a type of type. Let's just call it type, where t base is a mono behavior, or rather a prefab behavior. So we're doing two of these. We're doing basically a generic and a non-generic. Now I'm finger quoting right here because obviously instantiate is a generic method, but it's not generic to the type that's passed in. The reason we need the second instantiate method is the first instantiate method is when we know exactly which type we want to instantiate. But once we implement our actor system, the server's going to say to the clients, hey, instantiate this type, this actor type, right? And we won't know at compile time what type that'll be, so that's why we have the second one. We take in a t-base parameter as a kind of a helper, because we might have an inheritance hierarchy where, let's say we have player controllers, for example, and there's a base player controller class that's abstract, but then the specific player controllers inherit from that abstract type. So we might want to specifically pass in player controller as the base here, but then as the type, pass in something that's non-abstract and more specific. Anyway, so that's basically the public API surface that we're going to be using for now. So let's go ahead and write out our private members. So we're going to have a private read-only dictionary of type and game object, and we're going to call these prefabs. And then we'll have a private read-only game context. Now in our constructor, we're going to go ahead and instantiate our prefabs dictionary. So new dictionary of type and game object. Oops, game object. And then we're going to say context equals context. Now, the context parameter is pretty straightforward, or the context field is pretty obvious for what we need there. Obviously, when we instantiate our prefabs, we need to hook them up to the context. The way I'm doing this, though, is prefabs in Unity, you can reference them as game objects. So that's what we're doing here. We're mapping types, the concrete type to the game object, or in some cases, the interface type to the concrete type, object, but we're not implementing that now. We'll be implementing that when we actually put together our actor instantiation behavior. So the first thing we need to do is we need to scan that prefabs folder that I created. Now, obviously, that folder is empty right now, but we'll be obviously fixing that soon. So I'm going to say var prefab resources equals resources dot load all of type prefab behavior and prefabs. So what this is going to return is this is going to return a list of prefab behaviors. So it's going to load up all of the prefabs that are in that folder and find one that has a component on it that inherits from prefab behavior, and that's exactly the behavior that we want here. So I'm going to say for each var behavior in prefab behaviors, or prefab resources. Now it's important to understand that what we're getting returned here are not instances of the prefabs. We're getting returned the object as it would exist in our assets folder. So we're getting returned the equivalent of what thing would be in here. We're not getting returned actual instances of the prefab. So that's an important distinction. So then I'm simply going to say underscore prefabs dot add, and then behavior dot get type. So that'll get the specific type of this behavior, and then followed by behavior dot game object. So it's important that I reference the game object out of the behavior so that when I instantiate it, I'm not just instantiating the component, I'm instantiating the actual game object. And for some reason, ReSharper is not properly colorizing that local variable, but that's okay. Okay, instantiate's going to be pretty straightforward. We're simply going to do game object prefab, and I'm going to say if not prefabs try get value type of t out prefab, then we weren't able to locate it. So we can throw a new key not found exception saying could not find prefab of type. And then we can simply do type of t.name. Maybe full name. Okay, at this point now we have a reference to the prefab, so we have to go ahead and instantiate it. So I'm going to say var instance equals Unity engine.object. Now, I'm doing Unity engine.object here because object is a class that exists in the system namespace, but we're importing the system namespace up here. If I didn't fully qualify this class, we would get a collision. So I'll do instantiate, passing in prefab, and then I'll simply say get component of t. So now we're statically typed, and that's all awesome. And so at this point, we simply say instance.setContext_context, allowing the prefab to do any initialization that it might need to, and then we'll simply return instance. Okay, for this instantiate, we're practically going to do the same thing, except for it's going to be non-typed. So I could probably merge these two methods together. In fact, this code isn't completely identical. I probably could merge this. Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. So I'm replacing the type of t with the type parameter. And I'll simply say var instance equals cast to tbase, doing unity engine.object.instantiate. I really should have merged these methods. Prefab.get component type. And then we simply do instance set context, and then return instance. Obviously, the tbase, since we're casting to tbase, and the compiler knows that tbase has to inherit from prefab behavior, we have access to all of the prefab behavior methods. So that's how we can invoke get context there. All right, so now we have to talk about the canvas. So for the canvas, and the prefab factory itself. So for that, I'm going to jump into the game context, and the game context is going to have another top-level object, the prefab factory. So public prefab factory, prefabs, get private set, but it's also going to need a couple other parameters, a couple other things. We're going to need a kind of a canvas that we can attach dialog boxes to. And that canvas also needs a backdrop component. And the backdrop component is for modal dialog boxes. So the idea being is that when a dialog box wants to be modal and gray out the entire background, we want to be able to have that backdrop be shown. I kind of want to try something with this. So I think what I'm going to do here is, so we have our prefabs here. We haven't instantiated that yet. And we can go ahead and do that, actually. I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to scroll down here to our top level objects, and I'm simply going to say prefabs equals new prefab factory this. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a component, and I'm going to call this global canvas. And he's going to inherit from canvas. So I kind of want to see, or what's that? Yeah, I want to inherit from, oh, is canvas? Don't tell me canvas is sealed. Is it sealed? It is sealed. That's unfortunate. So I guess what we can do instead is have our global canvas accept a canvas. Well, first we have to make sure it's a mono behavior because we will be building this up. And we'll have a public canvas, and we'll have a public game object backdrop. So this is our global canvas, and we want to be able to, again, have this, have the backdrop be shown in some circumstances and hidden in others. And the way I'm going to implement that, let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and do a private, let's see, how do I want to do this? Let's do a, private list, or how about a private stack of game object? No, we'll do a private list of game object, and we'll have this active modals. And in our public void awake method, we'll go ahead and instantiate that. So public list of game object. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say public iDisposable. And I'll call this something like push modal, game object modal. And this is going to say active modals.add modal. And at this point, we want to make sure that the backdrop is active. So we'll say backdrop.setActive is true. And then I'm going to return a new instance of modal disposable, passing in this and modal. And then I'm going to create a private class modal disposable. that implements the iDisposable interface. And modal disposable for its dispose method. So what's it complaining about here? Oh yeah, we need a constructor that takes in a global canvas and a game object modal. And on his dispose method, we'll simply say canvas dot. Let's put the responsibility of removing this onto, or moving a modal onto the global canvas. So I'll say pop modal, and then up here I'll create a. I'm going to create a private void pop modal, game object or modal. And so what's cool about this is our private class has access to the private members of this class. So I'm going to say active modals dot remove modal, and then I'll say if active modals dot count is 0, then we'll say backdrop dot set active false. So this is a really naive, very, very simple, not very powerful implementation of this, but it's very, very straightforward, and the API will be able to in the future expand upon. So what I'm going to do here is back into my game context. I'll do a quick scroll of this code real fast. Anyway, back in the game context, up here, I'm going to create a public global canvas. Get private set. Whoops, I don't want to make a property. I want to make it a public field, because we're going to be assigning this within the Unity editor itself. So let's go ahead and create that canvas real fast inside of Unity, and then we'll move on to create our first prefab, which will be a simple alert dialog box. So let's move back over into Unity. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up Scenes Loader. Now inside of Loader, I'm going to go into the game context, right-click UI, and create a canvas. And for the canvas, I'm going to make sure its render mode is screen space overlay. I'm going to give it sort order to 100. And we'll keep its target display. And we're not going to worry about the scaler. And we'll go ahead and keep the graphics raycaster. And then in addition, I'll go ahead and give this a component called global canvas. And for global canvas, we need a reference to a canvas and a reference to a backdrop. So for the reference to the canvas, we're going to use itself, its own game object for that. And then for the backdrop, let's go ahead and put that together here inside. I'll click over to UI so we can design the backdrop. So I'm going to right-click Canvas and go to UI and create a panel. And for the panel, for the image, I'm going to go ahead and select none for the image. I don't want any of that rounded border nonsense. And for the color, I'm going to make it black and just semi-transparent. Now, of course, we can go ahead and put together animations and do a bunch of fun stuff with this, but as it stands, this is fine. I'm going to call this global backdrop, or modal backdrop. And then I'm going to click back over to the canvas, and I'm going to set the backdrop to that. So this game object will become active when there's a modal active, and it'll become inactive when there's not. So pretty straightforward there. I think I am missing something, though, inside the client. I do want to go over to the global canvas, and on awake, I want to say backdrop.setActive false. In addition to that, I want to jump, well, no, I don't really care. I mean, I could come over here and deactivate this here as well. It doesn't really matter, because when it starts up, it'll always be set to inactive. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our first awesome prefab to test the system out. So we're going to start out by creating the class. Let's jump over into Visual Studio, and I'm going to go ahead and I wonder where I should put this. I'm going to create a new namespace. I'm going to create a prefabs namespace. So these are kind of the global prefabs that we're going to be using. Obviously, we'll have different prefabs in other places for things like actors and all that fun stuff. Or maybe we'll have another namespace for actors as well. But these are kind of global general purpose prefabs. And the first one I want to write is going to be the alert dialog. So the alert dialog is going to have it's going to inherit, obviously, from prefab behavior. Make sure you inherit from prefab behavior, otherwise it won't be picked up by the scan at the start of the game. So we're going to have a public text, and we're going to pull that from unityengine.ui, and it'll be message, public text title, and we'll have a public game object title game object title container, and a public button close button. And we'll also have a private iDisposable modal disposable. And then we'll also have a public event action alert dialog on dismissed. So we'll be able to hook into the on dismissed event when this alert dialog is dismissed. So it's a pretty straightforward alert dialog. It's, in this case, always going to be modal, for now anyway. So our public, let's see, public void start, we want to go ahead and say, we want to go ahead and attach ourselves to the global, global canvas. So I want to say transform.setParent, and then I'm going to pass in context.canvas. So we're setting ourselves, or canvas.canvas, and then we're going to do false for the world position. And that's not going to work because we do canvas.canvas.transform. Or we could just do canvas.transform as well because they're the same transform. But make sure to pass in false here, otherwise the UI will be skewed significantly. Then I want to go ahead and say modal disposable equals context canvas dot backdrop, or whoops, dot push modal game object. So after that, let's go ahead and let's see here. Let's put together a builder method. So our builder methods, I'm going to create a kind of pseudo fluent interface thing. So we'll have a public alert dialog set. Well, actually, let's see. Let's do set can dismiss, bool can dismiss, and then I'll say close button dot game object set active can dismiss. So the close and then return this. We'll do public alert dialog. Set message, string message. And for this, I'm simply going to say if message does not equal null, then let's see here. If it does not equal null, then we're going to go ahead and say message dot set active. No, set active. Whoops, game object set active true, and then we'll say message dot text equals message. Otherwise, we're simply going to set. Oh, come on, you can do it. Pretty sharper. We're going to set the active to false, and then we'll return this. And we're going to do the same thing for the title. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this method. So set title. We're going to change the name of this to title. And then, no, we don't want to rename anything else. And then instead of that, we're going to use the title game object. And then we're going to go ahead and create a close method. So we'll do public void close. And close is simply going to destroy game object, oops, lowercase g, and then invoke our on dismissed. So if on dismissed does not equal null, on dismissed this. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and say public void close float seconds. So this is going to be an interesting one. I also want to be able to show an alert dialog for X amount of seconds. So I'm going to say if close button does not equal null, then close button dot, or whoops, close button should never be equal to null, so close button dot game object dot set active is false, or rather I can say set can dismiss false to be a little clearer on my intent there. And then I'm going to say start coroutine and pass in close in seconds. And then for that, we're simply going to say private IEnumerator close in float seconds, and I'll yield return new wait for seconds, no, for seconds, and I'll say close. And then finally, I'm going to do a public void on destroy, which will simply dispose our modal disposable. I'll do a null check. I'll say if not, or if modal disposable is not equal to null, then modal disposable dot dispose. So what that'll do is, if we are a modal dialog, which every alert dialog is modal at this moment. If we are in alert dialog, then go ahead and dispose our backdrop or our reference count to the backdrop so that when all modal dialogues are closed, the backdrop will disappear. Anyway, so that's the code for this. Let's go ahead and put together our actual prefab object. So jumping back into Unity. Well, actually, let me go ahead and show you guys how we would use the alert dialog first, because we have enough to use it, although it's not going to do anything because we haven't created the actual prefab. I'll scroll through the code real fast for you guys. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up our master server systems login system. And then for our, I'm going to just hook into our onConnected. And I'm simply going to say context.prefabs, and I'll say instantiate alert dialog. And then I'll say set title, this is an alert, set message, hello there, and that'll be it. So that's how you use it. You simply instantiate the alert dialog, you set its parameters, and then you go forward. Now, we can get a reference to this alert dialog and close it in a certain amount of time, or we can say close in, 5 seconds, for example. Okay, so that's our onConnected. Actually, I want close to return an alert dialog. Or the close float seconds. And then to be consistent, we'll do that same here. That's because I can imagine some instance where we might want the alert dialog box to close in 5 seconds, but we might want to get a reference back to it so that we can close it earlier if we wanted to. Anyway, obviously this code will fail because we haven't registered any alert dialog prefabs yet. So let's hop over into Unity, and I'm going to create a new folder under scenes. And I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call it garbage. So these are kind of garbage scenes that I use to create prefabs. So I'm going to create a new scene within the garbage folder. What's under legacy? Oh, cube map. Create a new scene inside of here, and we'll just call this alert prefabs. Or how about dialog prefab? So we'll use this scene to assemble our dialog-based prefabs. I'll close the console to get a little bit more space. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a canvas. And again, this canvas is just here for us to assemble a dialog box. So let's go ahead and create a UI panel, and this is going to be fun. Let's hope I can remember how to do this properly. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is, let's see, I'll go ahead and hold down Alt and kind of get the size to be something like that. I do want to go ahead and make sure that this dialog box will grow, but we'll do that after we figure out kind of the internals of it first and put in some dummy data. So I'm going to go ahead and call this alert dialog. And then inside of alert dialog, we'll definitely need a panel for the title. So we'll go ahead and call this title panel. And for this guy, I'm going to go over to the color, and I'm going to make it dark and set the opacity to be kind of high there. And then inside of the title panel, we'll create a UI text, and we'll call this title. And for this guy, I'm going to go ahead and anchor him in the center by holding down Shift and Alt and put him in the center. And let's go ahead and move his middle alignment to the middle right there. And for his, let's see, for his left, I want to go ahead and give him a 10. And for his top a 5, his right a 10, his bottom a 5. So that'll center him up nicely with a little bit of padding. And for his color, obviously, we want that to be white. So you can go ahead and make that bold or do whatever you want with it. Then after that, we're going to have another panel for the message itself. So we could do, yeah, I'll do a panel here. So we'll create a UI panel. And this is going to be for the text. And for this guy, I'm going to take off his image entirely. We're just going to use this panel, and I'll call this message panel. We're just going to use this for positioning and padding. And just like what we did before, we'll create a text. We'll go ahead and anchor him, and then we'll give him some padding. Let's do 10 pixels on all sides, so we have some nice padding there. And then we'll create another UI panel, and we'll call this buttons. And for buttons, we are going to, let's see here, let's leave it like that, or buttons panel. And then I'm going to right click, create a UI button. And this button, I'm just going to move him, just kind of eyeball it. Again, we're gonna fix up everything in a moment here. And this button will simply have a text of dismiss. Okay, so now for the hard part. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. At the very least, you guys will see the process of figuring this out. It's been a while, but I do want this to be I want the height of this dialog box to be calculated dynamically. So first of all, the alert dialog, I'm going to add a vertical layout group to. So now you can see that all of these objects are being aligned vertically and stacked. Next up, I want, let's go to the title panel. I want the size of the title panel, and for some reason my text disappeared. There we go. The editor is a little buggy, but that's Unity for you. For the title panel, I want it to be sized to its content. So I think the thing that I want here is a content size fitter. And parent has a type layout group. A child layout group should not have a since it should be driven by layout group. Okay, actually no, I want a layout element here. And for this, I want to say flexible height is 0 and preferred height is 0. I think that'll do that. Now for the size here, we want to go ahead and do we add a layout element to this guy and give him his flexible size to 0? I forget. No, in the title panel itself, we want to create a vertical layout group here, and we'll give a spacing of or a spacing of 0. And we'll give a padding, well, I guess we'll do our padding here then. So a left of 5, a right of 5, a top of 10, and a bottom of 10. And then we want to child force expand height and width. All right, let's think about this. Actually, I think, okay, so for the title panel, we want to force child expand on both of those. And let's see here. I think we want to set the, we want this flexible height to 0. I think actually this is what we needed to do here. And for our body, let's see. For our body, we're going to do the same thing here for our message panel. We're going to go ahead and create a vertical layout group, and then we'll assign our padding in here. Yeah, I think whoops, that's not at all what I wanted. Actually, yeah, I think this is what you need to do. And then for the buttons panel is going to have, I'm going to go ahead and create a horizontal layout group here. And we'll give it a padding of 10, 10, 0, 10. Well, that looks, maybe 5 top, 5 bottom. And keep it like that. And then for the alert dialog, now what I want to do here is I want to do a content size fitter. And I want the vertical fit to be min size, or preferred size. And that's actually pretty close. The button doesn't look right, obviously. But as you see, as I add more messages or text to the message, it expands. So that's what I want. Now the button panel is obviously not doing what I want it to, and I think that's because I need to create a layout group on the button. So I need to create a horizontal layout group, it doesn't matter, with a padding of left 10, right 10, top 5, bottom 5. And we'll not child force. All right, so then for the buttons panel, I'm going to take off child force expand width. And that doesn't seem to do anything. Oh, there we go. Take off the child force expand width on the button and the buttons panel. And now I think we're good. So if the title expands, we should get... All right, that's awesome. And if this expands, we should get that to work as well. So that's our nice little alert dialog. And we can change the... we can go ahead and... I'm going to go ahead and center this completely. And so we can come in here and we can change the default width to whatever we want. I think that's fine. I don't really care too much about that. And I think we are good. I don't like that rounded corner. So I'm going to go to the title panel and I'm going to change its source image to none. and I'll get rid of that rounded corner. And then for the buttons panel, I'll go ahead and change its source image to none as well. So now we don't have that that thing. We're also going to have to do the same thing to the alert dialog box itself. Just change that to none, and now we have a nice square alert dialog. So I don't like the padding here. Looks like we have a little bit of a padding issue. We have a padding of left of 5 here, but on the message we have a left of 10. Let's move the left and right to 5 on both of those so that they line up. And then maybe the buttons panel, we set the left and right to 5 as well. So now everything is lined up vertically, which is what I want here. So to recap how I did this, the main magic here is that the alert dialog has a vertical layout group and a content size fitter that sets its height to the preferred size of the height of the vertical layout group. Then the title panel, and why does the text keep disappearing? That's really bothering me. The title panel, so everything inside the alert dialog has to have a layout group so that the sizes get computed based on the content of that layout group. So the title panel has a vertical layout group, but it also has a layout element. In fact, I don't think the layout element is required anymore on any of these. No, it's not. I think actually a layout group implies a layout element, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so we have the vertical layout group, which sizes itself based off of the content. And the content here is just the title, and also gives us these padding options. So we do basically the same thing for the title and the message panel. The buttons panel is just a little bit more complicated because the button has to also have a layout group so that it's sized based off of the text. But that should be it. That is our dialog. So let's go to alert dialog. Let's add a component called alert dialog. And let's go ahead and assign its stuff. So text, I'm going to call this message. And so for here, and this is going to be called dismiss button. And so for the alert dialog, we're going to pass in the message, which is this text, the title, which is this text, the title container, which is the title panel, and the close button. And that should be it. So now we can go ahead and turn it into a prefab. So I'm going to click and drag the alert dialog into prefabs, and we now have alert dialog. So now let's go ahead and start. I'm going to start my Photon server real fast. So make sure that this is the right version of Photon. I always forget because I have a bunch of different versions installed. Is this the right version of Photon? I think so. Yes, it is. Let's go ahead and start Photon. And I'm not going to worry about starting the logs or anything. I don't really care about that. So let's go ahead and start as application, and you can go away. And then for scenes, I'm going to jump into loader. So loader should connect to the server and get a login system, and then the login system should show a dialog. So let's hit play. And we have an error. So this should be fun. Clearly things aren't working exactly in the way that I wanted them to. So let's go ahead and open up our console here. And we have object reference not set to an instance of an object. Null reference exception. Probably the most common exception in the history of programming, ever since nulls were invented. And it's happening on alert dialog line 22. So let's jump over there. And let's jump over to line 22. And it's saying it's null. It's saying object reference not set to an instance of an object. And I don't think it's talking about the context, because it shouldn't be. Probably not, right? Let's go ahead and I'm going to change this to override on ready. What did I call that thing? Prefab behavior on ready. So public override void on ready. Maybe the start is being called before the... what are you talking about? Protected already. Maybe the start is being called in the wrong order. So let's just go ahead and change the lifecycle event that we hook into and only execute that code once we have that set up. And we're still getting an error, but now we have 2 errors. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. Still on line 22. It really doesn't like one of these things. Could it be that my game context, I never set the canvas? I did not set the canvas. So let's go ahead and click and drag over the canvas. So the canvas is what was being null. So now let's hit play. And check that out. This is an alert. and hello there. And then it disappears after 5 seconds. So what I could do here is for our login system, let's go ahead and take off the .close in 5 seconds and hit play. So as you see, we have our backdrop and we have our dialog with our dismiss button. So I can go ahead and click it. And I can't click it, actually. And I believe the reason why I can't click it is because of something. Oh, I can click it. I never set up the event handler. Let's jump back over to Dialog prefabs. And for some reason, this prefab wasn't connected. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that entirely and then drag over and instantiate a new prefab so that it's connected, so that changes I make to this prefab will apply to all prefabs. And then I'm going to click on the dismiss button and come down here to the on click, add an event handler. For the target, we'll click over alert dialog. And for the function, we'll do alert dialog, and then we'll do close, which seems not to exist. Possibly, I forget the rules for this. So close, does it really only accept void methods? That might be the issue. That would be really silly if that was the case. But it does. Okay, so pro tip, if you want to hook into Unity's event system, your event has to return void. I'm not sure why that requirement exists, but it does. So close now returns void. But that means that, let's go ahead and apply our changes. And I'm going to jump back into Loader and hit play. We should be able to close the dialog box. Nope, we still can't. Let's go ahead and see if that close invocation even made it into the prefab. And it does. Well, it did. So alert dialog.close, and it's not clicking. Could it have to do with the backdrop? No. Does our canvas... Oh, we don't have an event. Do we have an event thingy? Oh, yeah. Ah, I know what happened. Inside of Loader, we have this event system, but it's being destroyed. Because remember, when we start with Loader, the event system object, which is tied to the canvas, an object that we need, it's being destroyed because it doesn't have don't destroy on load set to true. So an easy way to fix this is to move it into the game context. By doing that, it should not be destroyed. So let's go ahead and play again. Now our event system exists, and now our dismiss button works. Not only that, we see that indeed the backdrop gets closed. But yeah, so that is our alert dialog. I think in the next video we'll in addition to what we're going to do as well for our debug login window and our command line processing and stuff, that shouldn't take very long. We're also going to be adding in things like another prefab for a confirm dialog box, which you can select, a list of options, a list of buttons, and all that fun stuff. So that should be pretty cool. But I guess we'll see you guys in that video. And yeah, stuff and things.